Hi, my name is Chelsea Huss. I am a rising senior now. I'm an intern here in the city. I met Molly West, who works at ESPN. She's the VP of Global Operations here. She came to Cornell University, which she actually graduated from as well, to speak at a Big Red Leadership Institute speaking series, and she spoke towards personal branding and self-image. And afterwards, she really touched me, and I was really inspired by what she said, so we kind of kept in touch, and she really quickly evolved to become my mentor and best friend and sister. And so we're here today kind of to give you guys a little insight on what she's given me and how she's really impacted my life. Hi Molly, how are you?
Hi Chels, how are you?
How's it going? Good?
Good.
Was your day alright?
It was good.
Yeah?
It was good.
Okay, so I guess we met, what, a couple of semesters ago, last semester?
I think a year ago.
Yeah, oh, it's been a year
Yes,
already?
a little
Oh
over a
my
year, since last
gosh.
April.
Last April, that's awesome. So
I know.
I kind of would like you just recap, tell like kind of how we came to meet and then your story, your journey through Cornell and then how you came here and also really how you got into being a mentor and your leadership in women in sports and such.
Yeah, so I graduated from Cornell 19 years ago this spring, which I can't believe it's that long ago at this point. But when I was at Cornell, I was a social work major. Played field hockey when I was there, so that's the sports tie, right? I was a goalie. And my through line, we talked about this when I presented a year ago, through all my career and kind of passions throughout my life has always been to help other people, right? So when I was at Cornell, I majored in social work, and at the end of my tenure, I applied to a few programs to get my master's in social work because my goal was to be a therapist. And both schools rejected me. So there's all happy accidents is the way these things go. But and really a month later, I happened to graduate, not bragging, but in a good economy. So I ended up at a headhunter, and actually they noticed kind of my outgoing personality and thought advertising would be a good place to start. And it was interesting because it really was a different side of who I was, right? So I'd been focused so much on how I was going to help people. It wasn't necessarily focused, especially at that time in my life, on just fun, right? And I think the advertising business has a lot of fun in it for sure. So I started on the ad sales side as a sales assistant, which is the kind of basic kind of entry-level place where you start. After a year in the business, the digital industry was just starting to grow, and so it started to cause turnover at the most junior staff. After a year, I made my way into the inventory side of the business because I thought from a strategy perspective that would be interesting to learn. After a year doing that, I noticed that there was a need because of this turnover at the most junior level, and with my sports background, I wanted to help bridge the gap on helping these new folks start, right? So I had done the job, could we train people, could we help manage them more effectively? I was granted that opportunity, which was great. And then I spent the next 4.5 years doing that. Learned a lot about myself, about managing other people. I think we talked about sports through all of this. And I think right out of Cornell, if I knew I could have coached sports full time, that would have probably been the dream job. And I probably could have, but I wouldn't have made really enough to sustain myself, right? So this was kind of a corporate coaching opportunity, and that's the way I saw it, and I learned a lot from that. But as new opportunities occur and you create new opportunities for yourself, what ends up happening is the next opportunity you either have to create or fold yourself back into something else, right? And so I moved back into the inventory side of the house. Throughout that time in parallel, I had started my career at the Family Channel, and we were bought by Fox and then bought by ABC. So at that particular time, we were owned by ABC, and I was managing inventory, and I was connected. My boss there actually worked at ESPN, and ESPN had a particular opportunity, and it was an intra-company move, so I was able to move within the company to that opportunity. And I've been at ESPN now for 12 years, and I've always been over, or majority of my career, my 19 years, 15 years have been managing junior staff and ultimately helping them get their start in the business. So that coaching mentality piece has always been through the through line. But the bigger piece and stuff you and I always talk about is I definitely have a passion to help people just by providing my experience to other folks, right? So during the start of my career, I didn't necessarily plan to be in advertising, so I didn't really feel like I had the right to ask for that.
Yeah.
And I've learned that everybody needs it, and so I'm always willing and open to help whomever, whether it be another Cornell alum or student or other folks internally or externally. So it is, I think, part of my story here.
Well, now, did you have someone who helped you? Is that kind of what sparked the interest, or have you just always grown up wanting to help people in the way that you've helped people?
I think, I think all of us have had different people play a critical role in their lives in terms of, coaches, especially in sports. I remember being a young, starting in the 3rd grade as a young girl playing sports and pretty much with all the other boys. And I remember having my first coach was a male coach. Coach Garrison was great. And he believed in me right off the bat, right? And there was really no difference between me and the other boys. It was just, we were all players. Mm-hmm. And, if you have different people along your lives, my dad was a coach, it had the same kind of impact. He always believed everything was possible. So friends, mentors, I've had so much support throughout my life, but I think I never really had one person that I would classify as my only mentor. And corporately, the way I describe it is more a board of directors, like having people help you with different things because you have different needs in your life at different times, right? So there's probably I wouldn't be fair to say there's any one or no one person, right? So sometimes my sisters, my brother, just my husband, just really kind of you, right? I mean, how many times have we had conversations about
Well, have you ever experienced like the opposite, where you've had like someone kind of going against, supporting you, or like a really hardship that you've had to overcome?
Yes, I have. And I think that in my career, I think sports, we've talked about this before, I think being a really successful athlete or student, a big part of that is ultimately playing by the rules, right? And you always feel that there is a coach or somebody there, no matter how hard they are on you, they ultimately want to win. And so they want you to win. They want you to be at your best. Even if they don't communicate well, at the end of the day, that's what they want. And I think in corporate America and in life in general, not everybody wants that for you. And so I definitely had been challenged through my adult life in understanding that other people's perspective and what they give me isn't necessarily my truth. Could be their truth, but doesn't necessarily have to be mine. And I think that's important, because there was probably up to my mid-30s, I would just, hook, line, and sinker, believe pretty much what anybody gave me in terms of feedback. I would just take it as a challenge and try to improve myself. But, ultimately your story, your success comes from who you are. And you can't pretzel yourself into what someone wants from you. You and I have talked about that a lot. That's been a big lesson for me throughout my life. And not that that's I'm not done with that, ultimately our lives and our successes are personal to us, and you can't be doing it for somebody else. So that's not an easy thing, but we talked about that a little bit.
So something else that you've really impressed on me that I've kind of taken away with everything that I've been doing at Cornell or wherever I am is always evaluating or looking at what the problem I'm solving is. That is for. So can you talk about that a little bit and where you learned? Because it's really been helpful.
So I feel bad because I'm not going to remember his name appropriately, of course, but there's a brilliant Harvard professor who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma that came to speak at an ESPN event that I had the privilege of going to, and he's an economist. And he talked about how in life, and he was actually talking from a marketing perspective, how a small business had come to him and a TA to go out and identify who their greatest competitors were. It was a small business in Cambridge, let's say it was an ice cream shop or something like that. And your first thought, and they wanted to grow their breakfast business. And so him and his TA first said, well, okay, who are the competitors for breakfast? And they started rattling off who all the competitors were, the ones we would all typically think about. And every time you thought about a different competitor, it brings up kind of a different level of classification. So for example, typically you might think of for breakfast a donut, right? So if that's the competitive food set and they're an ice cream shop and they're doing a fruit shake, so the value as a consumer, you may want one thing versus another. What they started to realize with the consumer was that the person that wanted the fruit shake, the customer that they were ultimately drilling to, wanted an efficient container. They wanted not to be messy when they were on a commute. They wanted it to be healthy. They wanted it to be, and the long and short of this is, and he went through all the examples of this, was what is the actual problem to solve for? And the product that they were trying to solve for was all of those things. And they got to it by asking the customers as they would walk out, well, why are you getting this and not getting the donut? Why are you getting this and not getting the coffee? And then they started to realize when you drill down, what's the problem you're actually solving for? And I think that's important because in our lives we think we're solving the right problem. And being in operations, a lot of times you have to solve a problem pretty fast. But if you solve the wrong problem and it comes up again, you've actually, if you solve something and then it comes back again, you haven't solved the problem, right? So asking yourself what really is the problem to solve for here, I think is a smart question and also helps on the efficiency side, like not when you spin your wheels, right? Yeah, so.
And additionally, we've also really we read that book, The Four Agreements, which I actually flipped through a couple times, just like whenever I feel like it, just because it's really nice. But like not taking things personally, I think was something that stuck with me. And then going in, like when we're talking about, so I'm on the equestrian team, like we talked about, and being kind of what's that word? Liaison, between like the teammates and then coach is very difficult. And I think the hardest part for me, I think, looking back on the season was living with my teammates, the 8 of them who are like all my year, and then dealing with them in the social setting, and then switching over to the barn setting. And I think people took things, and still do to this day, things personally that would happen in the barn, and you'd see it carry over to the house setting. Does that happen, I'm assuming, corporate world here? ESPN? Yeah,
it does. I do think it might probably... It's all perspective, right? It all comes down to how you think about life, I think. And in my 20s, I used to have kind of like a work Molly and a home Molly, as they would kind of be different. And it's an interesting thing because as you start to get closer to who you are, and you're not trying to like pretzel yourself in, that person you just get so comfortable with, it almost doesn't matter as much because you're more consistent with who you're showing up to be.
Now, have you ever experienced it being kind of lonely in the sense like you've always played the mentor role, and like have you ever wanted people to ask you how you're doing, like kind of switch roles ever like momentarily?
Yes, sure. Yeah, be taken care of instead of doing the take. Yes. I think my husband has a whole story on that you could interview him on. I think so. And, I think part of that is knowing what you do need, and it's okay to ask for it too. It's so interesting you brought this up because my husband and I were just talking about this. What's the key to happiness? I don't really know, right? Exactly. But a big part of being happy is learning to just accept things for what they are, and not judging someone for like not doing the thing you need them to do.
Do you think that's possible though? Like, is it like a learned, once you learn it, you have it?
No,
or I feel like
I think it's ongoing. It's ongoing. I think sometimes like some people just can rub you a certain way and poke a certain button or push a certain button, and you almost have to get to a place of compassion for them. And this is not easy, but you don't necessarily have to understand it. You just have to accept it that it's them, and that it's not really you, right? I think that's a big part of it. It doesn't mean that that's an easy thing to do, and it can take. I mean, I have people in my life, it could take years to figure that, that coping strategy. But when you're not, if you don't say in your head, this is what they should be doing, because that in itself is a judgment. You're also applying pressure to yourself and that person at that particular time. It's not worth it. It's not easy on you to ultimately expect somebody and to sit there and hope and wait. Rather, just don't even spend the energy. Remember we talked about not the surrender experiment, the other book by Michael Singer, and I'm blanking on his, he talked about the pendulum.
Oh, yeah.
And how, ultimately with the pendulum, there's a sweet spot in life where you're in balance. And if you allow something to anger you, you can swing all the way out. And then eventually you're angry, and then you almost feel bad about it, so you swing all the way back. Now you're in this full loop, right? And so what you need to do is ultimately, you get so tired, you get back to middle.
Yeah.
Is to not actually allow yourself into that. Like, no, like, oh my God, I just pushed a button. I'm not even going there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's more about them than it is about me.
So are you at the point where you can do that?
I think it just depends on the day. It doesn't.
Yeah,
No,
I think
I'm by no means a master of it. No.
Yeah.
Yoga helps a little bit.
swinging all over the place. I'm like, okay.
That's only
Take a
natural.
breath.
It's only, and welcome to New York too, right? That'll be another part of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Walking in people, I don't even know these strangers, and they're like poking my buttons. I'm like, hey,
I
it's
know.
fine.
You
Just
see?
go get some food.
It's a whole exercise. It's an
Yeah.
exercise and like letting it go.
It is crazy, like noticing like all the things that we've talked about, how they can like apply to so
Yes.
many like facets of life. It's crazy.
know.
Like I know we've always focused on like team stuff
Yeah.
and whatnot, but it is crazy like
Yeah.
applying all these aspects.
I think
to-
again it just comes back to, you know, it's like when you and I have talked about figuring out what you want to do with your like career. It just keeps coming back to working on the inner core, like who you are and what you're going through, accepting what that is.
Mhm.
Again, these are all works in progress for me as well as for you and so on and so forth, but knowing that and not necessarily, and again here comes the four agreements, not letting the external control
Mhm.
you, control your internal. That's not an easy thing. I mean, you just, and again, you're not, we don't have to be perfect, so you're just going to roll with it as you can.
Yeah. So you think we're always like changing that? Sense?
Yes.
Like, we'll never get to a point where like we are.
I
who
think
we are.
then you move on to a new challenge. You know, I think spiritually they say that like a challenge comes to you over and over and over until you learn it. And then once you learn it, then you move to the next challenge, right? Because if you think you're here to like to develop and grow,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's kind of also an interesting part of having been an athlete and a high performing student. You kind of think like there's next thing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I have to achieve, and then I go to the next thing, and there's the next thing, and I'm done, and then I'm done, and I'm done. And, you know, life is messy like that. It just keeps coming back at you.
Now, so I know we keep talking about sports, and obviously, like, being on field hockey kind of shaped who you are. So,
Yeah.
what is, like, something, not one, but a couple of the greatest takeaways you've had 3 or 4 years being on that team, and, like,
Yeah.
what it's done?
I mean, I think all through, like, elementary school and high school, you know, I would say it was, like, more a gamer and not a practice person. Like, I would probably, you know, I'd go to practice, I would
Yeah.
do what I needed to do, but
Yeah.
I was more, like,
One that, yeah.
all in on the game,
Mhm.
right? As I love my team, so it wasn't like I was screwing around, but I just was more like, I
Yeah.
identified myself as the gamer more than the practice person. When I got to college, what I realized, especially as a goalie, was it's all about response. So you have to drill, and drill again to ultimately respond in the right way in that split second. There is no way that you're going to be able to think through what you're going to do within a second.
Mhm.
So my work ethic, I think, just, you know, increased even more so. And I had it on the academic side, and I wouldn't say I didn't have it in sports, but I was probably, I went through a lot more with my, forward with a lot more with my natural ability than I did with just practice.
Mhm.
So that was a huge lesson. Another thing that I learned from my coach, Shelby Bowman, that was amazing was I remember always wanting to be so perfect that my goal was to not get, you know, told by your coach you're not doing a good job,
Yeah.
right? And she was a person that would be very direct with you, and I just hadn't had that as a coach to that point in time. And she was also pushing me to be better, which I became as a result of it. But I always remember her, you know, telling me I needed to call the ball, which just means you have to say ball, right? And I'm growing up playing soccer. I had all these variations. It's mine. I got the ball, whatever. And I remember very distinctly that she called me out in a practice, did a timeout, and I was in my full goalie equipment, and you know, and said like, "I told you to say," and I was like, I didn't even know what I was saying. I don't care. Like, do, you know, 3 laps, right? So I'm doing the laps and I'm fuming and I was thinking about all the stuff and I'm like, oh my God. But what I got in that moment that I still bring forward to today, and I'm so grateful that she gave me that coaching, was she knew better what I needed to do.
Mhm.
And I don't need to defend my position. I just need to listen and do it. And I think that it's not that I was afraid of doing it, but I want her to think I was doing a good job. So I'm telling her, you know, trying to like defend myself. And that helped me very much corporately. I can't tell you how many times corporately I would just say, I don't know if I 100% agree in my head,
Yeah.
but I would just say, all right, I'm on it. I'm just going to do it. And yeah, and then honestly, I think, senior year I had a really strong year, and I think overall just knowing that, again, that work ethic, like there's really no limit to what you can accomplish if you can put the work in. So, I mean, tremendous relationships, as you know, like across the team, and but those would probably be the main things.
So have there ever been situations where, I know we always talk about you can't control anyone, but
Yeah.
being on either a team or here at ESPN, where you are so passionate and driven to, achieve X, Y, and Z, and you have some people you're working with who just aren't on the same level, but they're there
Yeah.
and you have to work with them? Like,
Yes.
what is your explanation or answer to, like, motivate them, but, like, kind of understand, like, where they're coming from? Because clearly there's something, like, deeper going on where they don't want to put in the same work.
So let me ask you this: what's really the problem to solve for here? Are we talking about motivation, or are we talking about, a partnership, or collaboration, or like how do you build? Is it bad energy? Like
yeah, like obviously they're here. Like, why are they here if they are not wanting to do the work?
Yeah.
Like, that kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I think that again, and it's important because I think the ability to honor where you're at,
Mhm.
that it's not where somebody else is,
Yeah.
and that it's okay that it's not.
Mhm.
All that does is release the pressure from you to be responsible for it, right? So it doesn't mean that, it doesn't make you a bad person for wanting them to be better or different, but it puts pressure on you that you actually can't necessarily control the output on, right? So I think, so there's some of that I think is important because, we can be frustrated at people, especially when you're busy, when you're at your most stressed. I think it's most annoying.
Yeah, that's what I experience. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God,
Right. Because when you're chill, it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Like, you
yeah.
do your thing, I'm gonna do my
Yeah.
thing. I think the question is, do you need them really or not? Because simply put, it's like an equation. If you know you ultimately have to get to the end zone and you need that person to help you carry the ball, then you have to get them on at least some alignment, some level of partnership. So, when you and I had talked this year, there was a few situations, and I said for you to say to them, okay, so what do you want to come out of this,
Yeah.
right? Like, so let's, because it doesn't have to be what Chelsea wants. Here's what I'm seeing, what are you seeing? And see if you can get them into a dialogue. Some people just don't want to participate in that.
And then what do you do?
You just basically, I don't want to say, it's not like you actively go around in a relationship where you don't, you're not trying to box them out. How many sports terms can I use in one story here? But just focus on the end point then.
Okay.
Because then I think it starts to become such a detractor. It distracts you from achieving your output.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, Shannon Cassidy, who's done a lot of training for ESPN and I helped co-administer a program for our department for a number of years, development program. Anyway, she used to always say, just assume positive intent. So, like, maybe they're not trying to, like, screw with your day, and there's really, like, something going on. Like, 'cause the other thing is to, I think, appeal to their human side. Like, you don't seem, like everything's okay. Is there anything I can do to help? Like, some people need the softness to open up, right? I think sometimes as athletes, you think, like, just, like, get it done, like,
So
like,
is that hard? Is
stop
that
it and
hard
get
for
it done.
you? Like, to...
Well, at the beginning of my
you.
career, holy smokes, I mean, if you interviewed some of the people I managed when I was at Family, I'm sure they would have said that I probably wasn't as compassionate,
Yeah.
Definitely. I think they would say that. Now I
I
definitely work on
experience that a little bit, especially on the team. Like, I'm very, not necessarily tunnel vision, but I just have a hard time,
Yeah.
like, putting myself in their shoes.
It's probably more about your desire or speed to achieve and slowing down to bring someone along. I mean, you'll get further if they're on board.
Yeah.
The question is, do you have the time, energy, to do that? I mean, ultimately, if everybody crosses the finish line together, it's better for the team.
Yeah.
But you're not responsible for changing their mind. You can only try, I think.
Yeah, that's something that I don't know why I always try to just, like, convert them. Always that line between caring for someone and
Yes.
trying to change them.
Yes.
I'm constantly flirting on it. Like, yeah. Now, looking back in hindsight, is there anything that you would do differently? Like, I know you always say everything happens for a reason,
Yeah,
but
I do think that now. Do you mean like career as a whole, or like, what do you mean?
Yeah, or just like your personal growth and going through like you
Yeah.
spiritually.
I mean, I think that, and one of the reasons why I think I preach so much about that intrinsic model is, you know, I went through a period of time where I allowed some critical people in my life to, who were feeding me, you know, let's say they were giving me critical feedback that I was believing to such a degree that it really hurt my confidence as a whole. It didn't, and in hindsight, like I could say, it doesn't really make sense, but I just swallowed it completely. And that's why I think I preach and talk a lot about the intrinsic, because, and you know, I think I needed to get through that to be able to even tell you this story, right? That's why the universe happens, things happen the way they happen, but it was so painful to go through that it's not about being tougher, it's about being more aware of who you are. So when someone says something to you, you can say, okay, I get where you're coming from, but that's not really me. That's actually more about you, you know,
So
than it is me.
Was there a point in your life where you knew like who you were? Like, is there some? I think I'm grasping it a little bit more now, but there's like freshman year, I had no idea. Like, like is there a time that you like could recognize that you knew, basically, yeah, who you were?
Probably about 5 years ago, more than anything, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I spent most of my adult life like really driving for success, whatever that is. For me, that was just like the next job and the next promotion and the next higher rating and the next, you know, performance rating, and then the next, you just get caught up in what all that is. And it only feeds you, it doesn't really feed your soul. It almost like, it's like a cash machine. It's like you're pulling money in and out, but it's not really helping the body and the mind like move forward. So I was definitely not in balance. And I had the pleasure and honor to go through the Betsy Magnus program that WIC put on, and I learned so much in that. The amazing women in my class, what I learned in there was that we're all connected, and we're all dealing with a lot of similar things. You know, we're really not as alone as you can sometimes feel, and that our challenges are shared. You know, we all have those, and so we're much more powerful together. And I think that group has helped me tremendously be comfortable with being myself. So, but yeah, that's a journey. Like, I couldn't tell you everything about myself, but I can tell you a lot more about myself now, and I'm much more comfortable sharing who that is than I did, you know, even in college. I was too busy just trying to be perfect.
Yeah, I think that's something that, well, not just me, but like everyone struggles with, the being perfect.
It's an ongoing struggle, my friend.
But so do you think that's the biggest piece of advice that you could give someone, is like letting go of things and really trying to figure out who you are before you?
And I think probably the other thing is like have more fun. It would be in hindsight, you know, because I was so busy trying to like do everything that, you know, my husband is just so much fun, and I think I think I'm much more like kid-like after having, you know, we've been together this year 22 years and married for 15, and we met in college, and frankly, you know, he's my best friend. We've always talked about this, but he just makes things fun. Like he can be goofy, and you know, and just give yourself permission to laugh. I think that's really, and to go have fun.
Yeah.
Like to maybe like not spend it. I used to have, like up till probably a year or two ago, used to have guilt for like just having a day where I did absolutely nothing all day long. Like, I don't have that problem right now.
I'll watch like binge Netflix for like half a day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I literally just wasting my life. Like, what am I doing? But that's funny. Yeah, I think I always will remember when you told me like be gentle on yourself. I tell that to people like all the time now. It's so true. I think we're so hard on ourselves for like the little minutia things that. Like,
the inner voice is pretty intense.
Yes, it's insane.
We all have that. Yeah.
But quieting that is quite difficult.
It is very, yes. You just sometimes need an escape. You need a different lane.
I know.
A different lane.
Thank you so much for
my
speaking
pleasure.
with me. I hope that people listening got, you know, a good glimpse of what we've been going over. I know it's just the surface stuff, but you've really made a huge difference in my life.
Thanks,
really
Jess.
grateful
You've done the same for me, too.